Every year, thousands of women travel to South America seeking affordable cosmetic surgery. Most return home satisfied. Some return with complications. But a few never return at all. In February 2024, a 58-year-old Colombian businesswoman named Isabella Vargas walked into a medical clinic in Medellin, seeking confidence and youth. 3 days later, she was dead. What appeared to be a tragic surgical complication was actually a meticulously planned murder, orchestrated by the two people she trusted most, her husband and her daughter. This is the story of how beauty became the weapon, how trust became the trap, and how a family's greed led to the perfect crime, or so they thought. Isabella Vargas was born in 1966 in Bogotá, Colombia, to a middle-class family. Her father worked as an accountant, her mother as a school teacher. Isabella grew up in a modest apartment in the Chapinero neighborhood, surrounded by books and the constant hum of city life. From an early age, Isabella showed exceptional business instincts. While other children played, she sold handmade bracelets to neighbors. By age 12, she was organizing small community events for profit. Her parents recognized her entrepreneurial spirit and encouraged it, though they worried it might distract from her studies. It didn't. Isabella graduated high school with honors in 1984 and immediately enrolled in business administration at Universidad de los Andes, one of Colombia's most prestigious universities. College was transformative for Isabella. She thrived in the competitive academic environment, quickly establishing herself as one of the top students in her program. She was particularly gifted in marketing and strategic planning. Professors noted her ability to see opportunities others missed. But Isabella's college experience wasn't just academic. In her third year, she met Ricardo Mendoza at a student entrepreneurship competition. Ricardo was charming, ambitious, and came from a wealthy family in Cali. He pursued Isabella relentlessly, showering her with attention and promises of a future together. Isabella, who had never experienced such intense romantic interest, fell quickly. They married in 1987, just months after graduation. Isabella was 21 years old. The marriage started well enough. Ricardo worked in his family's import-export business, while Isabella took a position at a marketing firm in Bogotá. They rented a small apartment near Parque de la 93 and talked about starting a family. But within 6 months, cracks appeared. Ricardo began staying out late, claiming work obligations. He became secretive about money. He criticized Isabella's career ambitions, suggesting she should focus on becoming a wife rather than building a career. Isabella tried to adapt. She convinced herself that marriage required compromise. But when she discovered Ricardo was having an affair with his secretary, something inside her hardened. She was 22 years old when she filed for divorce. The divorce devastated Isabella financially. Ricardo's family had resources she couldn't match. She left the marriage with almost nothing except her education and determination. She moved into a tiny studio apartment in Kennedy, a working-class neighborhood far from the upscale areas she'd grown accustomed to. She took any job she could find, waitressing at night, selling cosmetics door-to-door during the day, organizing small events on weekends. Sleep became a luxury. Meals became optional. But Isabella refused to quit. She saved every peso she could, living on rice, beans, and determination. In 1991, Isabella used her savings to start a small event planning company, working out of her studio apartment. Her first client was a neighbor who needed help organizing a quinceañera. Isabella charged minimal fees but delivered exceptional results. Word spread through the neighborhood. More clients came. Within 2 years, she had enough business to rent a small office space. By 1995, her company was handling corporate events and high society weddings. By 2000, Isabella Vargas Events was one of Medellin's most sought-after planning firms. Isabella had moved her business to Medellin in 1998, recognizing the city's economic transformation. Once known primarily for violence and drug cartels, Medellin was reinventing itself as a hub of innovation and business. Isabella saw opportunity where others saw risk. By 2020, at age 54, Isabella owned 3 commercial properties in El Poblado, Medellin's affluent neighborhood. Her event planning company employed 15 people and managed dozens of high-profile events annually. She lived in a modern apartment with panoramic views of the Abara Valley. She drove a late-model BMW. She had achieved everything she'd dreamed of, built entirely through her own effort. But success hadn't brought companionship. Isabella's romantic life had been a series of disappointments. After Ricardo, she'd dated cautiously. A relationship with a lawyer ended when she discovered he was still married. A romance with a businessman collapsed when she learned he wanted her money more than her. By her mid-50s, Isabella had resigned herself to being alone. Her friends urged her to try again. Her sister Gabriella constantly introduced her to eligible men. But Isabella had lost faith in finding genuine connection. Then, in November 2023, everything changed. Isabella attended a charity gala at the Medellin Convention Center. The event raised funds for educational programs in underprivileged communities, a cause Isabella supported generously. She arrived alone as usual, wearing an elegant black dress. She socialized with other business owners, made donations, and prepared to leave early. But as she walked toward the exit, someone called her name. She turned to see a man approaching, smiling warmly. He introduced himself as Klaus Hoffmann, a German businessman living in Colombia. He was 52 years old, tall, well-dressed, and spoke Spanish with a charming accent. Klaus explained he'd seen Isabella give a presentation at a business forum months earlier and had been hoping to meet her. He asked if she'd join him for coffee sometime. Isabella hesitated. She'd heard variations of this approach before, but something about Klaus seemed different. He wasn't overly aggressive. He didn't immediately compliment her appearance. He asked about her business, her achievements, her vision. They talked for 30 minutes at the gala, and Isabella found herself genuinely engaged. When Klaus asked for her number, she gave it. 3 days later, he called. They met for coffee at Pergamino, a popular cafe in Parque Lleras. The conversation flowed easily. Klaus talked about growing up in Munich, studying international business, and eventually relocating to Colombia for work. He said he'd fallen in love with Colombian culture, the warmth of the people, the vibrant energy of Medellin. He asked Isabella about her journey, listening intently as she described building her business from nothing. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer unwanted advice, he just listened. For Isabella, who'd spent years around men who only wanted to talk about themselves, this felt extraordinary. Over the next 3 months, Klaus and Isabella became inseparable. They went to restaurants in Envigado, took weekend trips to Guadalupe, attended concerts at Teatro Metropolitano. Klaus was attentive, thoughtful, and seemed genuinely invested in Isabella's happiness. He never asked about her money. He never pressured her. He simply made her feel valued. By February 2024, Isabella believed she'd finally found the partner she'd been waiting for. What she didn't know was that Klaus Hoffmann wasn't who he claimed to be. His real name was Klaus Müller. He wasn't a successful businessman. He was a con artist with a criminal history spanning 3 countries, and he'd been planning Isabella's murder from the moment they met. Klaus Müller was born in 1972 in Frankfurt, Germany, not Munich, as he'd told Isabella. His childhood was unremarkable except for one defining trait. He learned early that lying was easier than working. By age 16, he'd been expelled from 2 schools for stealing. At 19, he was arrested for credit card fraud. At 23, he served his first prison sentence for embezzlement. Klaus had a gift for reading people, identifying their vulnerabilities, and exploiting them. He was particularly skilled at targeting older women. Over 3 decades, he'd worked variations of the same scheme across Germany, Austria, and Spain. He'd approached successful women in their 50s or 60s, women who'd worked hard and accumulated wealth but felt invisible in a youth-obsessed culture. He'd romance them, gain their trust, then drain their bank accounts before disappearing. Sometimes he used fake investment opportunities. Sometimes he borrowed money for fabricated emergencies. In extreme cases, he convinced them to add him to their wills before orchestrating accidents. Klaus arrived in Colombia in 2019, after Spanish authorities issued a warrant for his arrest. He'd stolen nearly 200,000 euros from a widow in Barcelona, and this time the police were closing in. Colombia offered what Klaus needed: lax enforcement of international warrants, a large expat community where he could blend in, and plenty of wealthy targets. He settled in Medellin under a false identity, using forged German business credentials to establish credibility. For 2 years, he ran small-scale cons, nothing ambitious enough to attract attention. Then he saw Isabella Vargas speak at a business forum in October 2023. She was poised, confident, and radiated success. Klaus researched her immediately. He discovered her net worth, her properties, her business holdings. He learned about her failed marriage, her years of solitude, her careful approach to relationships. He recognized her type instantly: accomplished, independent, but emotionally vulnerable. She'd built walls around herself, but Klaus knew walls could be climbed if you took your time. Klaus planned his approach carefully. He needed a credible backstory, so he created Klaus Hoffmann, a fictional German consultant specializing in Latin American markets. He forged business documents, created fake references, and memorized details about industries he'd never worked in. He joined professional organizations where Isabella was active, attended events she'd likely attend, and ensured their first meeting appeared accidental. The charity gala in November 2023 was his third attempt at orchestrating an encounter. The first 2 times, Isabella had left events before he could approach her. But the third time worked. Klaus introduced himself, deployed his carefully rehearsed charm, and secured her phone number within 30 minutes. The courtship followed Klaus's standard pattern: slow, steady, and strategic. He never rushed. He never asked for money. He built trust incrementally, demonstrating interest in Isabella rather than her wealth. He researched Colombian culture meticulously, learning about food, music, history, and social customs, so he could connect with her world authentically. He asked about her daughter, her family, her friends. He listened to stories about her past, filing away details for future use. And gradually, Klaus became indispensable to Isabella's life. She introduced him to her business associates. She brought him to family gatherings. She trusted him. That trust was exactly what Klaus needed. In January 2024, Klaus met Isabella's daughter for the first time. Camila Vargas was 32 years old, born in 1992 when Isabella was still rebuilding her life after divorcing Ricardo. Camila had grown up watching her mother work relentlessly, sacrificing everything to provide opportunities her daughter never fully appreciated. Where Isabella saw hard work as virtue, Camila saw obsession. Where Isabella found purpose in building something from nothing, Camila felt neglected. Their relationship was complicated, marked by resentment Camila never fully articulated, and guilt Isabella constantly carried. Camila worked nominally in her mother's company but showed little interest in actually contributing. She lived in an apartment Isabella paid for, drove a car Isabella bought, and spent money Isabella earned. Yet she convinced herself she deserved more. Klaus recognized Camila's resentment immediately. He saw how she watched her mother with barely concealed envy. He noticed how she complained about Isabella's rules, her expectations, her control over family finances. Klaus saw opportunity. One afternoon in late January, Klaus suggested to Isabella that he take Camila to lunch, an effort to build a relationship with his partner's daughter. Isabella was touched by the gesture. She had no idea what Klaus was actually planning. At lunch, Klaus deployed a different version of his charm. He commiserated with Camila about how difficult strong mothers could be. He validated her feelings of being undervalued. He asked subtle questions about Isabella's assets, her estate planning, her health. And he planted a seed. Your mother has accomplished so much. You should make sure you're protected. You deserve to inherit what she's built. Over the next month, Klaus and Camila met several times without Isabella's knowledge. Each meeting deepened their conspiracy. Klaus learned that Isabella had recently updated her will, leaving everything to Camila, but in a trust that wouldn't fully transfer until Camila turned 40. Klaus also learned Isabella had significant life insurance policies totaling nearly $3 million. He learned Isabella was self-conscious about aging, particularly compared to Klaus's relative youth. And he learned something crucial. Camilla's resentment ran deep enough that she might be willing to do something unthinkable. In early February, Klaus made his proposal. He told Camilla he knew a doctor in Medellin who performed procedures for cash, no questions asked. He suggested they could arrange for Isabella to have surgery and arrange for complications to occur. Camilla would inherit immediately rather than waiting years. They'd split the insurance money. Klaus expected Camilla to refuse, to be horrified, to walk away. Instead, she asked how much her share would be. Klaus had worked with corrupt medical professionals before. In Spain, he'd partnered with a disgraced pharmacist to fake a heart attack. In Austria, a former nurse helped him administer sedatives to an elderly woman who later fell downstairs. But Colombia presented unique opportunities. The country's medical tourism industry was booming, attracting thousands of international patients seeking affordable cosmetic procedures. Medellin in particular had become known as the plastic surgery capital of South America, with dozens of clinics offering everything from minor enhancements to complete reconstructions. Most clinics were legitimate, staffed by skilled surgeons with international training. But the industry's rapid growth also created gaps in oversight, and those gaps attracted practitioners willing to cut corners for profit. Klaus found Dr. Julio Reyes through criminal contacts in El Poblado. Reyes had been a licensed plastic surgeon until 2021, when Colombia's medical board revoked his credentials following multiple malpractice complaints. 3 patients had died under his care within 18 months, all from complications he failed to properly address. Rather than face prosecution, Reyes paid substantial bribes to ensure cases were closed quietly. He then opened an unlicensed clinic in a nondescript building near the Envigado border, catering to patients who paid cash and asked no questions. Reyes still performed legitimate surgeries for some clients, but he'd also developed a side business, helping people disappear problems for the right price. Klaus met Reyes at a bar in Laureles in mid-February. He didn't reveal his full plan immediately. Instead, he described a hypothetical scenario. A wealthy woman, late 50s, interested in abdominal surgery, family willing to pay generously for a procedure with inevitable complications. Reyes understood immediately. He'd heard variations of this request before. He quoted a price, $100,000, half up front, half upon completion. Klaus negotiated down to $80,000. They shook hands. No contract, no paper trail, just an understanding between criminals. The harder challenge was convincing Isabella to have surgery. Despite her success and confidence in business, Isabella harbored deep insecurities about aging, particularly in relationship to Klaus. The 6-year age difference wasn't dramatic, but Isabella worried constantly that Klaus would lose interest as she grew older. She noticed younger women glancing at Klaus in restaurants. She caught him occasionally looking at fitness models on social media. She told herself these anxieties were irrational, but they persisted. Klaus recognized these insecurities and began exploiting them systematically. It started with small comments disguised as compliments. "You look beautiful today, though I know you've been tired lately. I love how confident you are, even though I know you worry about aging." The comments were subtle enough that Isabella didn't register them as criticism, but they planted seeds of doubt. Klaus then began mentioning women he knew who'd had cosmetic work done. "My colleague's wife had a procedure last year and looks 10 years younger. It really boosted her confidence." He showed Isabella before and after photos he found online, always framing it as admiration for women taking control of their appearance. He never directly suggested Isabella should have surgery. He simply created an environment where the idea seemed natural, even desirable. Camilla joined the campaign in late February. During a family dinner, she casually mentioned that many of her friends' mothers had cosmetic procedures. "It's so common now, Mama. It's not about vanity. It's about feeling good about yourself." Isabella laughed it off, but the comment lingered. A week later, Camilla sent Isabella an article about successful businesswomen who credited cosmetic surgery with improving their confidence. The article was real, published in a legitimate Colombian magazine. What Isabella didn't know was that Klaus had paid the editor to run it at that specific time. By early March, Isabella was researching procedures on her own. She looked at tummy tucks, considering how much weight she'd gained and lost over decades of stress. She read about liposuction and abdominal contouring. She told herself she was just curious, but Klaus recognized the signs. She was convincing herself. On March 8th, Klaus made his move. Over dinner at Isabella's apartment, he took her hand and said, "I need to tell you something. I've noticed you've been looking at information about cosmetic surgery. I want you to know that I love you exactly as you are. But if this is something you want for yourself, I support you completely. You deserve to feel as beautiful as you are." Isabella felt tears forming. No one had ever spoken to her with such care, such understanding. She admitted she'd been considering a procedure, just something minor to address areas that bothered her. Klaus nodded thoughtfully. "If you decide to do this, we should find the best surgeon possible. Actually, I know someone who might help. A German colleague used a clinic here in Medellin for his wife. Very discreet, very professional. Would you like me to ask about it?" Isabella hesitated only briefly before agreeing. Klaus made a show of calling his non-existent colleague that evening, then reported back that the clinic came highly recommended. He offered to arrange a consultation. Isabella, trusting completely, said yes. The consultation was scheduled for March 15th at Dr. Reyes's unlicensed clinic. Klaus had already paid the $40,000 deposit. The insurance policies were already in place, taken out 3 weeks earlier, through a broker Klaus controlled using forged documents. The trap was set. All that remained was getting Isabella through the door. Dr. Julio Reyes's clinic occupied the second floor of a commercial building on Calle 10 in Envigado, a middle-class municipality bordering Medellin. The building's exterior showed age but not neglect, exactly the kind of place that wouldn't attract attention. The entrance had no medical signage, just a small plaque reading, "Consultorio Médico Privado." Inside, the waiting area looked professional enough. Leather chairs, medical journals on a coffee table, soft lighting that suggested discretion rather than secrecy. Klaus had coached Reyes extensively on how to present himself. The clinic needed to appear legitimate without being ostentatious, reassuring without inviting scrutiny. Isabella arrived for her consultation on March 15th with Klaus beside her. She felt nervous, though she couldn't articulate exactly why. The building seemed fine, the location reasonable. Still, something felt off. Klaus sensed her hesitation and squeezed her hand. "Remember, my colleague's wife was very happy with her results here. Dr. Reyes trained in Buenos Aires and Miami. He just prefers working privately rather than in big hospital settings." The explanation sounded plausible. Isabella pushed her doubts aside. Dr. Reyes greeted them warmly in the consultation room. He was 58 years old, gray-haired, wearing scrubs and a white coat that gave him an air of medical authority. He spoke Spanish with a slight coastal accent, explaining he'd grown up in Cartagena before studying medicine in Argentina. He asked Isabella about her medical history, her goals for surgery, her expectations. His questions seemed appropriate, professional. He examined Isabella's abdomen, discussed options for abdominal contouring and liposuction, and showed her before and after photos of previous patients. The photos looked impressive, though Isabella couldn't have known they were stolen from legitimate surgeons' websites. Reyes explained the procedure in detail that sounded medically credible. He'd make an incision below the navel, remove excess fat, tighten abdominal muscles, and recontour the area for a more youthful appearance. Recovery would take 3 weeks. Risks included infection, bleeding, and in rare cases, complications from anesthesia. But Reyes assured Isabella these risks were minimal for someone in her good health. He'd performed hundreds of similar procedures with excellent results. When Isabella asked about his credentials, Reyes had answers prepared. He claimed he maintained his medical license but chose private practice for personal reasons. He offered to show documentation, knowing most patients wouldn't actually request it. Isabella didn't ask to see papers. She trusted Klaus, and Klaus trusted Reyes. That was enough. The cost was quoted at $12,000, payable in cash before surgery. In Colombia's medical tourism market, this price sat in the middle range, neither suspiciously cheap nor prohibitively expensive. Isabella agreed to think about it. Reyes scheduled a potential surgery date for March 22nd, 1 week away, pending her decision. As they left the clinic, Klaus asked Isabella how she felt. She admitted she was nervous but also excited. Klaus smiled and told her she was making a brave choice, investing in herself after years of only thinking about others. That evening, Klaus met Camilla at a cafe in Manila, an upscale neighborhood where they were unlikely to encounter anyone who knew Isabella. They reviewed the final details. The surgery was scheduled. Reyes had confirmed he'd administer a lethal dose of propofol mixed with potassium chloride during the procedure, stopping Isabella's heart in a way that would appear to be cardiac arrest brought on by anesthesia complications. For a woman Isabella's age undergoing elective surgery, such deaths, while tragic, weren't unheard of. The autopsy, if one was even performed, would likely confirm cardiac event as cause of death. Reyes had done this before. He knew how to make murder look like medicine. Camilla asked what would happen to her mother's body. Klaus explained that Reyes would call them immediately after Isabella died, claiming he'd done everything possible but couldn't revive her. They'd arrive at the clinic, perform grief appropriately, and insist on taking Isabella's body to a funeral home quickly, citing Catholic traditions requiring swift burial. The funeral home Klaus had selected was run by another associate, who'd ensure minimal examination of the body before cremation. No autopsy, no evidence, no investigation. Just a tragic accident and grieving family members. Camilla's hands shook as Klaus outlined the plan. "Are you having doubts?" Klaus asked. Camilla shook her head. "No, I just want it to be over." Klaus reached across the table and took her hand. "After this, you'll never have to worry about money again. You'll be free." Camilla nodded, though she couldn't meet his eyes. Some part of her still recognized the enormity of what they were planning, but greed and resentment had calcified into something harder than conscience. On March 18th, Isabella told Klaus she'd decided to proceed with surgery. Klaus pretended to be supportive, while privately confirming final arrangements with Reyes. The $40,000 balance was paid in cash, withdrawn from Isabella's business account as medical expenses. Klaus insisted on handling payment arrangements, explaining that Reyes preferred patients not to worry about financial matters directly. Isabella appreciated his thoughtfulness. She had no idea she'd just paid for her own execution. The days before surgery passed in a blur. Isabella informed her staff she'd be taking time off for a minor medical procedure. She told her sister Gabriela she was having routine surgery, nothing serious. She bought comfortable clothes for recovery. She stocked her apartment with easy-to-prepare meals. She felt nervous excitement, like she was doing something daring but worthwhile. Klaus stayed close, attentive and reassuring. Camilla visited frequently, playing the role of concerned daughter. Neither of them could bear to look at Isabella directly for too long. March 22nd began with unseasonably cool weather in Medellin. Isabella woke at 5 in the morning, unable to sleep. She'd followed all pre-surgery instructions. No food or water after midnight, no makeup, comfortable clothing. She showered carefully, dried her hair, and dressed in loose sweatpants and a button-up shirt. Her hands trembled slightly as she buttoned the shirt. She told herself it was normal pre-surgery anxiety. Everyone felt nervous before going under anesthesia. Klaus appeared in the bedroom doorway, already dressed. "Ready?" he asked gently. Isabella nodded, though she didn't feel ready at all. They drove to Envigado in Klaus's rented SUV, arriving at the clinic at 7:30. The building looked exactly as Isabella remembered, unremarkable and quiet. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, where a woman in scrubs greeted them at the door. She introduced herself as Nurse Patricia and led Isabella to a small preoperative room. Patricia took Isabella's vital signs. Blood pressure normal, heart rate slightly elevated but within acceptable range, oxygen saturation excellent. She marked everything on a chart and told Isabella that Dr. Reyes would be in shortly. Klaus stayed with Isabella, holding her hand, telling her everything would be fine. Dr. Reyes entered at 8 o'clock, professional and calm. He reviewed the procedure one final time, answering Isabella's last-minute questions with practiced reassurance. He explained that anesthesia would be administered by his colleague, Dr. Moreno, who specialized in surgical anesthesia. Isabella would fall asleep within minutes and wake up in recovery several hours later. Reyes asked Isabella to sign consent forms, which she did without reading carefully. The forms absolved the clinic of responsibility for complications, a detail Isabella's trusting nature prevented her from questioning. Klaus witnessed her signature, his expression appropriately concerned. At 8:45, Isabella was moved to the operating room. The space was small but equipped with necessary surgical instruments, monitoring devices, and an operating table positioned under bright overhead lights. Nurse Patricia helped Isabella onto the table while Dr. Moreno, a thin man in his 40s, prepared the anesthesia equipment. Klaus was asked to wait outside. He kissed Isabella's forehead and told her he loved her. Isabella smiled, genuinely happy despite her nerves. Those were the last words she heard before the IV line entered her arm. Dr. Moreno injected the first sedative, a standard pre-anesthetic cocktail that relaxed Isabella immediately. Her eyes grew heavy. Reyes stood beside the table watching the monitors. Moreno prepared the main anesthetic agent. But what he loaded into the syringe wasn't standard propofol. It was propofol mixed with a concentrated dose of potassium chloride, a compound that would flood Isabella's bloodstream, disrupt her heart's electrical rhythm, and cause cardiac arrest within minutes. Moreno had performed this procedure twice before for Reyes. Both times the deaths were ruled natural complications. At 9:07, Moreno administered the lethal injection. Isabella's body relaxed completely as the sedative took effect. For 60 seconds, everything appeared normal. Then her heart rate began to drop. The monitor's steady beeping slowed, became irregular, then flatlined. The machine emitted a continuous high-pitched tone. Reyes made a theatrical show of checking her pulse, shouting orders to Patricia, and beginning chest compressions. But his movements were slow, ineffective, designed to appear as effort without actually attempting resuscitation. After exactly 4 minutes, Reyes stopped. He looked at the wall clock and pronounced the time of death, 9:13 in the morning. Patricia, who'd been paid $10,000 for her participation, stood frozen near the wall. She'd known this would happen, but witnessing it still shook her. Moreno calmly removed the IV line and disposed of the syringe in a biohazard container he'd later incinerate. Reyes pulled off his surgical gloves and walked to the waiting area, where Klaus sat pretending to read a magazine. "Mr. Hoffman, I need to speak with you immediately." Klaus looked up, his expression shifting to alarm. He followed Reyes into a private office. "There were complications," Reyes said quietly. "Your wife had an unexpected cardiac event during anesthesia induction. We attempted resuscitation, but we couldn't revive her. I'm very sorry. She's gone." Klaus's performance was masterful. His face drained of color. His hands began to shake. He asked if he could see her. Reyes hesitated appropriately before agreeing. Klaus entered the operating room, where Isabella's body lay on the table, covered with a white sheet except for her face. She looked peaceful, as though sleeping. Klaus stood beside her for a long moment, his back to the others. When he turned around, tears streaked his face. They were real tears, summoned through techniques he'd learned years ago. Not tears of grief, but tears nonetheless. Klaus called Camilla at 9:45. "There's been an accident," he said, his voice breaking perfectly. "Your mother didn't make it. Her heart stopped during surgery. You need to come now." Camilla arrived 30 minutes later, playing her own role. She screamed when she saw Isabella's body. She collapsed to her knees. She sobbed hysterically. Patricia later told investigators that Camilla's grief seemed performative, rehearsed, but in the moment no one questioned it. Grief took many forms. Klaus insisted they contact a funeral home immediately. He claimed Isabella had expressed wishes for quick burial according to Catholic tradition, though Isabella had never said such things. Reyes recommended a funeral home in Itagüí, another associate who'd ensure minimal examination. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Isabella's body had been removed from the clinic. By 6 o'clock, it was at the funeral home, embalmed and prepared for cremation. No autopsy was performed. The death certificate listed cause as cardiac arrest during elective surgery, signed by Dr. Julio Reyes. Isabella's funeral was held on March 25th at a chapel in El Poblado. Dozens of business associates, friends, and family members attended. Klaus and Camila sat in the front row, accepting condolences with appropriate solemnity. Isabella's sister Gabriela noticed something odd. Klaus seemed more concerned with his phone than the ceremony. She saw him texting repeatedly during the service, smiling briefly at responses before remembering to look somber. She mentioned it to her husband, who suggested grief affected people differently. Gabriela wanted to believe that, but her instincts told her something was wrong. The following day, March 26th, Klaus and Camila were supposed to be arranging Isabella's estate matters. Instead, they were at Santa Elena, a scenic viewpoint in the hills above Medellin, popular with tourists and locals. They took photographs together, laughing and embracing with the city sprawling below them. A tourist from Argentina named Martina Ruiz was photographing the landscape when she captured Klaus and Camila in the background of her shot, holding each other like lovers, not stepfather and stepdaughter grieving a shared loss. Martina posted the photo to Instagram that evening with the caption, "Beautiful Medellin sunset," and the hashtag Medellin travel. Gabriela's daughter Sofia, Isabella's niece, followed travel hashtags for Medellin as she planned a trip. On March 27th, she was scrolling through recent posts when she saw Martina's photograph. She almost scrolled past, but something made her pause. She zoomed in on the couple in the background. Her stomach dropped. She recognized Klaus immediately, and then Camila. They were embracing intimately, faces close, bodies pressed together. Sophia screenshot the image and sent it to her mother with a single question mark. Gabriela stared at the photograph for a long time. Her sister had been dead for 5 days. 5 days, and Klaus was at a romantic viewpoint with Isabella's daughter, looking nothing like a grieving widower or concerned stepfather. Gabriela showed the image to her husband, then to Isabella's business partner, then to 2 close friends. Everyone had the same reaction. Something was very wrong. On March 28th, Gabriela went to the Fiscalía General de la Nación, Colombia's Attorney General's office in Medellin. She filed a formal complaint requesting investigation into Isabella's death. The case was assigned to Fiscal Sandra Mejia, a prosecutor with 15 years of experience in homicide investigations. Mejia reviewed the death certificate, noting that Dr. Julio Reyes had signed it. She ran Reyes's name through medical board databases and discovered his license had been revoked in 2021. That alone warranted investigation. She obtained a court order for Isabella's financial records and discovered insurance policies totaling $2.8 million, taken out only 6 weeks before her death, with Klaus and Camila as beneficiaries. The policies had been purchased through a broker Mejia's team quickly identified as operating fraudulently. Mejia requested surveillance footage from businesses near Reyes's clinic. Cameras from a pharmacy across the street showed Klaus entering the building on March 10th and handing an envelope to a man later identified as Reyes. Bank records showed Klaus had withdrawn $40,000 in cash that same morning. Mejia obtained warrants to search Klaus's apartment and Camila's phones. Text messages recovered from Camila's device, which she'd failed to properly delete, were damning. Messages to Klaus from February included, "When will this be over?" and "I can't keep pretending to care." Klaus's responses, "Soon. Stay patient. The money will be worth it." On April 2nd, arrest warrants were issued for Klaus Müller, Camila Vargas, Dr. Julio Reyes, Dr. Moreno, and Nurse Patricia. Tactical units from the Policía Nacional executed the arrests simultaneously at dawn on April 3rd. Klaus was taken from his apartment in Laureles without resistance. Camila was arrested at Isabella's apartment, where she'd been living since her mother's death. Reyes and Moreno were found at the clinic, attempting to destroy records. Patricia was arrested at her home in Belén. All 5 were held without bail. The trial began in September 2024 at the Palacio de Justicia in Medellin. Prosecutor Mejia presented overwhelming evidence: the fraudulent insurance policies, the cash payments, the text messages, surveillance footage, and testimony from the Argentine tourist whose photograph had exposed them. Dr. Moreno offered a reduced sentence for cooperation, testified that Reyes had ordered him to administer the lethal injection. Patricia confirmed she'd been paid to assist in murder. The defense arguments collapsed under the weight of evidence. On November 8, 2024, the tribunal delivered verdicts. Klaus Müller and Camila Vargas were convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and fraud. Dr. Julio Reyes was convicted of murder and practicing medicine illegally. Dr. Moreno received a lesser conviction for manslaughter. Nurse Patricia was convicted as an accessory. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Klaus received 40 years in Cárcel de Máxima Seguridad in Cúmbita. Camila received 35 years in Complejo Carcelario y Penitenciario Medellín. Reyes received 50 years. The insurance companies voided all policies. Isabella's estate passed to Gabriela, who donated substantial portions to women's entrepreneurship programs throughout Colombia. Klaus Müller remains in Cúmbita prison, isolated from other inmates after multiple threats. Camila Vargas appealed her conviction unsuccessfully. She'll be eligible for parole in 2049, at age 57. D'Artantar. Reyes died in custody in 2025 from undisclosed causes. The case transformed Colombian regulations governing medical tourism and cosmetic surgery practices. Yet every year, thousands still travel seeking procedures, trusting doctors they've never met, unaware that beauty can be weaponized by those who see opportunity in vulnerability.